Welcome. Can I tell you a secret?
Mm.
On my way here, I wrote to ChatGPT. As I was walking over here, I was like, I have a bit of an imposter syndrome going in to meet to meet this person that I've heard about and that I've been wanting to meet for so long. And ChatGPT was just so kind and compassionate. I don't know if it's like that with everyone. I think it's just adopted a voice that it thinks I really like, but it was very sweet.
So I can say I also have an imposter syndrome.
You do? You have an imposter syndrome?
I remember that once I had a friend that got a lab in Weizmann Institute, and I once traveled with him on the train, and we met there, and then he was telling me that he just created a group in Weizmann Institute for the young researchers, and the first thing they're talking about was imposter syndrome. And I said, if you have an imposter syndrome, then I'm completely normal.
For people who think mindfulness, compassion, wisdom are kind of like these woo-woo, new agey words. Some people will even associate it with like the left or like progressive values, or like people who sit on the sidelines and sit on a cushion and are disconnected from reality. What I love about you is that you bring the science to it. You're a neuroscientist. So much of what you do is research and really science-backed. So I think for a lot of people who are maybe a little skeptical, that might allow them to come a little closer to being willing to hear what mindfulness is about on a really kind of scientific basis. So I think there was like a study about the brains of like long-term meditators look different. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Do we actually understand what happens to the brains of people who go through this kind of flow state?
What you see is that, first of all the machinery that's dealing with predicting the reality and predicting the world is affected by these practices. And it's talking much more to the information that's coming from the body. And the information from the body is being used much more in order to make decisions. For example, we have a study I really like where we show people these really difficult images, emotionally difficult images. And we tell them, try to regulate yourself. You can do it either two ways. You can either bring your attention closer and really try to appraise what's happening and say, okay, let's really understand what's happening there. So that's called cognitive reappraisal. Or you can think about something else. So your eyes are still on the picture, but your attention is, somewhere else. So that's like distracting yourself from the image. So we let people do that. And then what we see is that people that go into a mindfulness course, so we do it before and after, and we compare it to those that don't, the regular controls. And we see that people that go to a 8-week, MBSR course.
The MBSR, mindfulness-based
and
stress reduction.
Their heart rate starts predicting what they will do. Will they be able to get closer, to engage with what's happening, or disengage? And we know from a lot of psychological studies that your ability to actually understand from moment to moment the situation and what's the best way to deal with it, it's believed to be the predictor of resilience, of mental health, because it's this flexibility to say, okay, maybe now that the thing that's happening is so difficult that I'm going to be overwhelmed, and overwhelmed can be trauma, right? So I need to take a step back. I need to regulate myself. I need to prepare myself to go closer to this difficult situation. So that would be a moment, distract yourself or try to disengage. But if you disengage all the time, then you actually don't solve the problems in your life. But if you engage all the time, you can very fast be overwhelmed and
get burnout
and burned out. Exactly. So your ability to say, okay, now I can do it. I can deal with it. I can go close. No, I can't. I take a step back. So what we found is that when people do the mindfulness course, after that, when the heart rate doesn't decelerate so much when they're given these images, that means that they're not so overwhelmed by it. They actually decide more to engage. And when the heart rate decelerates more, they do more disengagement. So their body and the brain are attuned to each other, and that supports the decisions of how do I regulate myself in front of something that's aversive, right? So this is an example of this flexibility that this practice enables. That brings us more well-being, and then more resilience, and then maybe more wisdom. So I think when you look at it from that point of view, there's no reason to think that these practices belong to certain types of people. I think all people, whether on the right wing of the political spectrum or on the left wing of the political spectrum, all people are prone to delusion, to self-delusion, to self-harm, to foolishness, all. And we see that now. All people can really benefit from using this and actually connecting to these high cognitive functions, this ability for metacognition, which is really the special thing the human brain has.
How are all the ways that mindfulness help either from a health perspective or emotional perspective or societally within communities, within families?
Maybe we can, for the listeners, we can just do a short mapping. We try to, the basic mindfulness practices are the one that most people are aware of, is these practices of just bringing awareness to the present experience. So being able to be in the present moment and in what's happening actually right now in my experience, this already has a lot of personal benefits and well-being benefits, because what our brain does all the time is trying to predict reality. And it has this really sophisticated machinery. The brain is more like a predictive machine. All the time we have like these brain maps, brain models of the world, and we're trying to predict what's going to happen, am I going to be okay? The question that's most interesting to the brain is, will this body be okay also the next moment? Also okay from inside and also okay from the outside. Will I be safe? Will this body live? When I bring all my attention to my body, it's actually really helping, like, give all the data that my brain needs to say, okay, I'm on it. Everything's okay. I'm really getting what's happening right now. And this is why just doing that really can induce a lot of relaxation. So I always say to my students, whatever you do, if you just connect your body, your senses to what's happening in the moment, then that's already really relaxing. And by the way, in Hebrew, it's really nice because in Hebrew, moment is rega, and relax is leheraga.
Roga, yeah.
Roga. So it's really interesting.
There are so many words like that in Hebrew, I think.
Yeah, it's an ancient language, and it's interesting sometimes to learn from the language. So most of the people, when they say mindfulness, they actually mean these type of practices, which is just about bringing attention, to the breath, to your body. You could do mindfulness when you're running and when you're washing the dishes and when you're just taking a few breaths, right, and doing yoga. And then the second group of practices would be when you actually add something really, I would call it dramatic, radical, which is the way you bring attention to whatever is happening. And that's adding the component of non-judgmental, accepting, curious to whatever is happening. So you're not saying, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is an experience I want, this is not. You can be with whatever is. So you're already inhabiting, the moment. Inhabiting is like being in a home. I'm in the home of my life right now. And at this moment, I'm at home, This being at home is something that was so disrupted since October 7th here in Israel in so many levels, being at home, the home as a safe place. I'm in my home and whatever's happening is okay. I can accept whatever's happening and there's no conflict. This is really powerful. And then you have the group of practices that are mindfulness-based, which are about cultivating compassion and empathy and gratitude, which are also very supportive of the way I meet the world. If my mind is all the time trying to predict the world and I induce in it some kind of these more positive states, so I will meet the world in a more, positive way. And that's more or less where I think mindfulness practices are known in the mainstream of Western cultures. I think that we need to put more emphasis on the last group. That was actually the reason that mindfulness was undertaken inside the Buddhist project regarding getting free of these foolishness states, which are self-destructive states, and really being a free person in a world that can be very turbulent and with a lot of uncertainty, and still staying free. And you take all the tools that you already developed in the first 3 groups, and they're really essential. That's the basics. And now with all these abilities to be present with this attitude that is saying, everything is okay. And being able to shift your attention to the more beneficial mindsets deliberately. And then with these abilities, you can now start to deconstruct your experience and see actually how your mind works, and start to see the way that in order to deal with the infinite reality, our mind creates biases. I think that these kind of capabilities are, I would say, prerequisite for our ability to transform our societies and to heal our societies. Because if we are not able to see these biases, then we always will look at the world from a very narrow perspective. And then we will not meet other people because each is looking from their own narrow perspective. We will not be able to create shared world views. And that's the prerequisite for being able to reduce conflict, to create healing.
So the first stage might be me kind of, I'm with the kids at home and I adore them and they're triggering me in various ways, and I have all these thoughts that I'm not aware of. Am I feeding my son the right things? I just saw that my sister feeds her son this thing, and am I a good enough mother? And then my son, why does his friends? And I'm talking like this because the mind doesn't think in a very kind of literary way, right? There's all these thoughts, and I'm feeling a bit sick. I'm worried about my body. What's going on? Maybe I have cancer. Going to the worst case scenario, because that's what human brains do anyway. All these thoughts, and so the first stage might just be to pause for a minute, for 10 minutes, whatever you can, and just to notice what is happening in this present moment. Is there really like a big sense of threat in my home right now? No, there isn't. Looking at the reality, maybe even kind of like looking at objects, because that's something that people sometimes do, is just look at objects. Noticing your breath, maybe your heart rate is high, and just kind of noticing. And then you're saying the second step would be to kind of try to add that added element of not judging, not saying like, gosh, you just studied 2 years of meditation and to be a meditation teacher, and you've had all these thoughts and your heart is racing and it shouldn't, and just saying like, it's okay. Like trying to look at it without judging. And then the next stage might be to add that kind of additional part of us, because you talked before about the shadow and the light, and to consciously bring in the light, because the shadow, we all have it. What we want to do is consciously bring in the light, and the light might be another woo-woo word that I know a lot of people don't like, which is compassion, which is just really just imagining someone really kind. It can be like a grandmother who loved you, or a pet, or a dog, or a spiritual figure, or just an older, wiser version of you just looking at you and saying like, gosh, this modern world, this war, this child rearing on our own in the modern era, it's so complicated. You're doing so well. Just give yourself, a break. You're really great. So that's maybe like the compassion, or the loving kindness might be just imagining like other people in their homes going through the same shit, all thinking the same thing. And I think what you're saying is, if you manage to kind of implement that in your life sufficiently, then when you go around, when you're either a civilian in the street, or you're a policymaker, or you're a politician, you can still have opinions. It's not like meditators or people who are disconnected from reality. They still believe in things, but they are able to look at it all with less kind of wounding and kind of the triggering that so many of us have from childhood, and the division.
And maybe I would just like highlight a few points which I think would help us really see how this would give us not only the relief, but also the ability to engage in the world. And that would be that, first of all, really being able to pause and be with whatever is happening right now. But this is not a small thing, because like what you just described, it sounded like whatever's happening right now is a really unpleasant experience. And being able to really open our arms to unpleasant experiences and be able to not only host them, but have this deep understanding that unpleasant experiences are part of life. Like this, sometimes we have this really deep belief inside us that unpleasant is not good. But seeing that, okay, belief is now triggered, and that's actually triggering all the other things, right? And what if I can just be with, okay, I'm worried, or I'm a little bit anxious, or I'm not happy right now, or my body is very tired, I don't have energy, other things that happen in regular life, but especially in times like now, which are turbulent, it's even on steroids, right? So what if we can really not be destabilized by the unpleasant? So that's so deep to understand that, because when we can be really okay with the unpleasant and really understand deeply that this is part of life, then this also helps us open our hearts to unpleasant things that are happening, to being able to be with suffering of other people, whether it's from our in-group or from the out-group, and not immediately need to fix reality. So shame or rage are usually because we can't bear being with this suffering, either seeing the suffering of our side or the suffering of the other side, and we just can't bear it. So then our mind starts trying to arrange reality. So either by rage, which, okay, who is actually guilty, or we are the guilty ones. And these are two strategies that are actually not enabling me to just be with the fact that now there's suffering and just hold that. But it starts from being able to do that with myself. And the second thing that you said about bringing the light, I would say it's more about widening the ability to actually see that the darkness, the dark parts, are just as enlightened. It's part of us in a very deep sense, and it's not something we want to, move away from, but actually being able to bring up these positive or beneficial qualities, it gives our nervous system this prediction that I'm all right now. And when I'm safe, I can actually turn into the things that I'm afraid of. And it starts from the things I'm afraid of in myself. So, for example, a little bit after the war started, I went on sabbatical. I was planning to be on sabbatical, and my plan before everything started was to go to a long retreat. I had a lot of questions if to go or not to go, and then good friends of mine said, Nava, the things that you guys did, with all the MBSR and mindfulness that you did in Israel, it's here and it's working. You can continue with your plan. And I really felt that I had to go to these deeper levels, because I felt intuitively that these are the levels we will need for social healing. So I went for a long retreat. And when I went into the retreat, none of the hostages was back yet. So there was all the hostages, and there was this young girl, I think Avigail was her name, 4-year-old, that her parents were killed and she was taken hostage. And every time I thought about her, I felt rage. I felt inside me the longing to revenge. Every morning I started like 2 hours of cultivating the compassion and empathy to all the suffering. And I always got at some point to the hostages. And then all this rage and revenge came out. And I said to myself, Nava, you have to stay with that. You have to get friendly and not be afraid of these emotions, because if you feel this right now, and that's after 27 years of practice, then you can start understanding human beings, and you can start to understand all these deep currents that are creating these situations that human beings do these terrible things to each other. And it has to start from you knowing that it's also inside of you. And that was a huge lesson for me, to really see these dark forces and say, I have them too. I'm just maybe more alert, or more trying to inhibit them, or trying not to let them go out. But I'm not better than other people in the sense that I also have that. And I think that when people are able to do this process, and it starts from the first dealing with my husband and with my kids, and when people are able to see that, that's already actually the basis of the higher practices. And if you do the practices for relief, if you do them deeply, actually that's the basis for your engagement in the world. And that's the thing that is so deep about these practices.
And that's what also makes them different from the wellness industry. Ultimately, all of us at some point will face, and now we are all facing, very great difficulties. So I don't want to make it sound like mindfulness is only about dealing with difficulties. It's just dealing with what is, whatever comes up, and not necessarily accepting it in the sense that, oh, well, I'm not going to do anything about it, but just seeing it for what it is.
And transforming. So there's to be with what is, and then something in the way you meet reality transforms. And this transformation process, if we go back to the brain into cognition, it changes something in the way the processes in your cognition work. It's like a muscle, this transformation, this ability to transcend the current situation. And that's very powerful. An insight. So it's a process that enables you to gain some insight about the relationship between you and the world. So it's like a muscle. When you start training your mind in a way that you start having these insights, these aha moments, at the beginning it's spontaneous. At some point it starts to be part of your life. By the way, it also happens, I think, when people take psychedelics. So all kinds of practices that open up some insight. Once you get into them, and it happens a few times, it's like your machinery starts being more open to these kind of abilities. And then, more and more insights, that's already like the flow situation, which so many people crave, right? This flow situation, because flow situation means that all the time, I'm really connected to what's happening, really connected. I really understand what's happening. So that's really important, I think, for people to understand that these kind of practices have potential which has not yet, I think, been realized in our Western societies. And I think that in this turbulent era that we're going into right now all over the world, and of course here in Israel, we're already there for a few years, we will have to go into that step in order to be able to really transcend the situation and transform our shared reality.
I want to talk a little bit more about you and your own mindfulness practice. You started out as a scientist, a neuroscientist. What made you kind of drawn to this more contemplative practice?
So, the more I get older, I sometimes have these realizations about what were the seeds. First of all, when I was a child, actually I was in the United States, and I had a teacher called Mr. Medville, Alan Medville. Maybe you'll hear me. Now I know that he was a good friend of John Kabat-Zinn, which brought the mindfulness. And I remember that he read us, the part in Walden of Henry Thoreau about going into the woods to be able to realize something deep about life. And I was 6th grade, and I remember how deeply it touched me. So I think that's a moment I can remember about a seed that was planted there about, is there something in life which is deeper? I also think that being a daughter of, my father was a Zionist in the former USSR, and he was arrested. He was Asir Tzion. In the 70s, a lot of people that were in the Zionist movement, and most of them only wanted to come to Israel and were refused to come to Israel. And the only thing he did in this movement was just to teach Hebrew. And he was arrested, and he was in 2 years in the work camps. And in the 2 years, I think he had half a year that he was sitting in a prison cell, waiting for his trial to come, and knowing nothing about, it wasn't a democratic state. He didn't have any rights. He knew that the trial is not going to be a fair trial. He didn't know if he was going to get 2 years or 15 years. Half a year sitting like that in a small cell, and then all the other stuff that was happening, being in a work camp, just doing the same movement with the hand for 16 hours a day, and in cold and no food and stuff like that. And I think that these stories really touched me to the sense of feeling that I need to know that I could be free, a free person in all conditions. And I think that in the end, the mindfulness or Buddhist practices are really talking about being free from the conditions of the world. And I think that was another strong thing. But the trigger was like everything, like in most cases, was suffering. I had backaches and all kinds of difficulties with my bodies, and I started yoga, and then I had this insight about how much our mind can control our body, and our body affects our mind. And then I went to my first Vipassana insight meditation, and from there on, it's a life journey.
Part of the projects that you've done is working with marginalized communities in Israel, there are Palestinian Israeli populations and Ethiopians, Orthodox Jewish Bedouins, etc. And you've really tried to bring mindfulness to them. Does your data show that these benefits last?
So the studies with these groups was more cultural adaptation studies. One of the things that we see in Israel and all the world is that the people that usually adapt these practices, at least the first waves of the people that took these practices in, were people that came from this more like white middle class social groups, and also in Israel. And one of the things that we want to understand is what needs to happen for other groups to take it in. What are the cultural adaptations that are required? One of the things that we saw very strongly all over was that, of course, all these groups are groups that are usually more marginalized. They're in the lowest levels of the social status, most of them. As a group, they have much more stress. Their stress is also systemic stress. And the reaction to the practice was always very strong. Always like, wow, this is really, really helpful. But also we saw that in most of these groups, people said, well, actually, it's not so new to me. I mean, we just call it differently, or we have some other perspectives of these kind of qualities. It's something that's in the wisdom of our groups. And I even remember one of the women from the Ethiopian community, which she then became a very good friend of mine, and unfortunately she died 2 years ago from cancer. She was one of the first participants in the group of the study. And very fast she said, I just realized that this is qualities that we had in our group, but when we came to Israel, we sort of threw the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because we wanted so much to be like you guys, and we didn't realize that we have these qualities of mindfulness, of kindness, of compassion, of generosity, right? And it really helped her connect back to her culture and say, you guys call it mindfulness, you came from Buddhism or from neuroscience, but that's something we know from our culture. And I think that one of the things that all of the groups said was, we need to be really able to take these practices the way you guys do it. We need the people that teach us these practices to really know our pain, to really understand what is our sources of stress. And if someone will be able to talk to us in the language of our pain and our stress, it will open up our hearts more. So that was also very significant to learn that about these groups. So that's one of the things I learned, that there's actually these wisdom already inherent in many groups and people. I always say to them, I wish you could somehow connect back to the wisdom of your ancestors and bring it to the Israeli marketplace of all ideas, because we really need these qualities right now.
In a way, I think, mindfulness has really boomed in the last decade, maximum, 2 in the Western world. And it comes from a great need, but I think also more than ever, it's probably very, very hard to be mindful. Even before COVID and war and, global political upheavals, etc., just the pace of our modern societies, the technology, the kind of expectations, the fact that most of us, maybe in Israel a little bit less, but in most of the world, kind of raising our kids alone, not much help. People have jobs and kids to look after, and there's just a lot of stress. So in a way, like, mindfulness is needed and also really hard, because you have so many distractions all the time that kind of pull on all your brain strings. In the past year and a half in Israel, I think more than ever, just the sheer terror and horror of what happened here means that a lot of people went into kind of survival mode, which makes all the sense. And you know more about this than me, but I think survival mode means that kind of you're really in the kind of first primordial areas of your brain. Those are very activated, and the more kind of evolved parts of the brain are almost shut off. And I think you see that in Israeli society even a year and a half later, even though October 7th has passed, a lot of people are in that place. Do you find that even in yourself and in fellow meditators, have even people who've meditated for years like you being able to kind of remain in that more regulated part of their brain where they can take in the information and the suffering, like you said, have the flexibility of knowing when to engage with it, when to distance themselves from it, come back to their center? Or do you see even like in that kind of group a real difficulty with engaging with real mindfulness?
When I think about the future, in order to make the future better, we need our minds to be able to be clear and do good sense making. And I think, maybe it's radical, I don't know, but the way I see things right now, I think that all of the horror that's happening right now, or most of the horror that has happened and is still happening, and all the tragedy is in the end the result of not enough minds being able to break free from these fetters. And so everybody's in their own cocoon, and not being able to find ways to create a different reality. And when I think for myself, what is my level of optimism or pessimism, it's always looking at how many people that are, let's say, in significant positions are able to see clearly. So if you go to people that have been practicing for many, many years, I think that for many of them, these capabilities that they have practiced and trained are actually there for them right now. And you also see that many of them are also very active. I think many of the people will have a hard time to go through all these stages of mindfulness practices that we described before. And maybe just the first steps of just being, with the body and the senses, and just somehow telling the brain or the nervous system, like you said, right now I'm okay. Right now everything's okay. Okay, and just being with that and allowing some relief. But I do think that people that are in more central positions, people in the academia, people that are teachers and principals, of course, people that are in the civil services and are heading organizations, politicians, we need a critical mass of people to realize that some of their project, whatever they're doing, has to start with them gaining more clarity, to do better sense making, to widen their worldview, to be able to get closer to reality. And how do they know that they are doing it? If they are constantly surprised by what's happening and not predicting what's happening, that means they're not close to reality. And look how people are all the time blaming someone else. Well, how come we didn't predict that? How come we didn't see it coming? That's because we're not really close to reality. And I think that if we want to do social transformation, then there needs to be effort done so that this critical mass of people that are in central positions, right, of influence of the society are being able to more self-transcend and more transform and have a ability to gain what's called perspectival knowledge, which is the ability to see in many perspectives, not only my perspective. First of all, see that I have only a certain perspective. That's already a meta-cognitive jump. But also being able to see from different perspectives and see from the perspective of the person that I most disagree with. Even for the listeners right now, think of the person you most disagree with and try to think of you looking at the world through their eyes. The body, I feel it in my body, already you feel the body tighten. That's where you need the mindfulness. You need to be able to work with this tightening, not to react to it, relax into that, so you can continue doing the process of looking through the eyes of that person, so you will be able to get closer to reality, because that's the only way to get closer to reality, to see it from other perspectives and participate more in the reality. That means not only work with your assumptions. That's only one model of the world. There's so many other models. If we won't do that, and from other reasons you said, it's very difficult to do that right now. And we as a society have not come prepared to these turbulent times. And this is why people like me, for the last 15 years, trying to bring mindfulness into the Israeli education system, because that's where the kids, they have more resources to be able to train their minds to do that. And this is why, I was standing on so many platforms, so many stages, and talking to people and saying, we have to bring mindfulness into education society. And it was so hard, to persuade people why it's important. Only when the COVID came and the people wanted more resilience, they opened the doors to mindfulness, really. And still, it's so hard to do that. And you have to understand that this is the prerequisite we need for the next generation to be able to solve the complex problems of this area. They will have to be able to have a set of ecology of psychotechnologies that will be able to help them deal with the complex reality. And at this moment, we need a critical mass of leaders to be able to do that step. And if we don't do that, it will be more, let's say we will be more prone to the waves of hatred and conflict. War that's how I see the reality right now.
A lot of people believe that today. I mean, the number one kind of thing that should be taught in school is mindfulness. A lot of studies show it's more important than maths and than English. I mean, especially with the rise of AI, etc.
Social emotional skills and
Yes.
contemplative abilities.
Right.
So if we want to say it's not just as mindfulness,
Right.
so people can connect from different places to that, anything that develops social emotional skills, contemplative abilities, critical thinking, and I would say complex cognition, that's the set of tools that our kids need to be able to be the adults that make sure that this place will have a brighter future.
On Sunday, we got a message from my second daughter is in Kita Aleph, first grade, and the teacher wrote, "We're coming back to school, and the first hour, what we'll be doing is meeting in the mamat, the shelter, because that's the only free room, and doing mindfulness." And I was so happy to read that. So if it's any encouragement to you, I think there are the seeds.
We have a project in the Sagol Center for Brain and Mind, which I run. We are working for 15 years, and lately we really feel that there's more and more need and more and people are much more interested in this. We call it mindfulness-based social emotional learning. And this is very encouraging. I mean, today we are working with math teachers that are asking for contemplative pedagogical tools. So kids are not doing meditation, but they're bringing in contemplative pedagogy when they're doing math.
Meaning they can kind of look at themselves.
Yeah, so I can do math, but I can also ask myself, does this stress me? For example, or they also study how they are with the math. And we know from a lot of studies that most of the problems that children have with math is because of the emotional reaction. So this is a doorway to bring in contemplative tools. And this is happening in many other places that we're working in. Many other organizations today are working. So in Israel, actually, there's a really exciting social emotional / mindfulness scene for a small country. Unfortunately, the waves of turbulence are also very high. So, it's who's going to win, all these beautiful efforts or the waves of hatred and tragedy.
Yeah, and I think, when you meditate, you realize how powerful these are. I mean, it doesn't take much for someone to kind of pull you in to divisiveness and, dehumanizing other groups. It's like you said, it's something that's in us.
It's inherent in our biology.
Yeah.
We have to overcome it. We have to do something with awareness to not fall into that place.
Yeah. I think the trends that we're seeing politically worldwide, for me, are also an indicator of people, at least the political class, moving away from a certain kind of mindfulness, because I read that there are two kinds of leaders. There are the leaders who lead by unifying, by saying, I'm from this political party, but I'm the leader of all the people, and I will try to do my best for all the people, even if I have to make tough decisions. And there are the leaders who lead by dividing and by saying, I'm the leader of these people, and those other people are terrible, and trying to take away what you deserve, and are not worthy. like a parent, like the house you grow up in, the kind of political climate we are in, we're like sponges. We feel that. But when a leader is able to look at people that they disagree with, but still with a certain kind of empathy.
I want to just tell you that we can learn actually from the brain, that I think we can learn from the brain which of these strategies is more beneficial actually to the group itself.
To the in-group.
To the in-group. So today we can image the brain, and then with all kinds of mathematical tools we can start modeling the brain network and then trying to analyze what's the characteristics of this network. And one of the interesting things that is coming up, the pathological brain states are characterized by two extremes. One is that the network of the brain is actually disconnected into smaller groups that are not talking to each other well. So that would be these groups that are actually going inside the in-group and fighting the other groups and not trying to collaborate with the other groups. That's a pathological brain state. The other state, which is pathological, the other extreme, is that there's no differentiation between areas in the brain. Everything is more connected, but you don't have differentiation. And you need differentiation because the world is so complex, you need different abilities. So the healthy brain state is the state where all the neurons, all the areas are both organized into groups, but also connected, which is a very complex way. Now, not everyone in each group is connected to all the others. That would be the pathological. Each group has a few representatives. That would be the leaders, the wise leaders.
You're talking about actual brains, actual neurons.
Brain,
yes.
Actually neurons. So they would have a subgroup that is actually connected to the others. And they're like helping produce a situation where, on one hand, each group has its own differentiation, but they can also work together to deal with the bigger problem, which is life. Okay? So if you think about the brain network, which is actually the hugest social network that exists, because all these neurons are like these elements that are getting excited every time something's happening, right? So that's just like us, and they want to tell it to others. So that's a social network. And actually, we know that the brain is built like a social network. It's called the small world network. So if you think of the brain as the model for what we should aspire to a healthy human society that can deal with the problem of this planet, then you understand that groups that are disconnected and just fighting each other, in the long term, it won't benefit these groups. I mean, the people in these groups will have less chances to survive. And this idea that everybody is connected and we're just one human thing and we don't want nations and we don't need identities and everything, that's actually, from what I understand about the brain, is probably also not the best solution. The solution is that there is identities, and these identities, they bring something to the global picture. They have some specialty. So maybe the wisdom of Judaism, wisdom of Islam, or wisdom of a certain culture, or some kind of abilities. But also they can work together in harmony. And this is a more complex situation. And most human beings, it's difficult. Either I can be, I'm just all human, global humanity, and I don't want these identities too complicated. Or, I'm inside my identity, and my identity is the best identity, and all the others are, And this again shows why you need these higher state of consciousness, which are able to, I can be in my identities so long that it's beneficial. It helps me as a group to get organized, to care for each other. But I can also get out of the identity, at least some of the people can do that, to connect to the greater picture. My identity is also, I'm also a human being, or I'm also part of the human network, and work with other people to create a more harmonious life for everybody. And I think this is a lesson we need to learn from the brain and aspire to this situation, which will require from us to be able to move between identities. And like we said before, engage or disengage, we need to this flexibility based on the situation. So in certain situations, we want to be more in the in-group, and in certain situations, we have to look and take care of the other people, even if we don't like them, even if we really wish they wouldn't be here, but they're here. And we need to understand that their well-being is actually affecting our well-being, and we have to learn to live together.
I think one of the things that October did for many people, and perhaps too much to an extreme, is let go of this idea of globalism, global human rights, we're all the same, etc. Because when your survival is at risk or you feel that way, it's natural to want to go to your in-group, to your tribe. And so I really discovered the kind of physiological benefits of being with people who were in the same situation as me, moms who live close to me, who are experiencing the same sirens, who are Jewish, who are worried about anti-Semitism, who are worried about our government. It's like it's a very close group that makes my physiology feel really safe. And I need that. And there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of value in my kids feeling that they can knock on these people's door and it'll feel familiar. It'll feel like home. On the other hand, that kind of tribalism, like you said, can really lead to states where when we feel very attacked, we cannot see the kind of larger picture anymore, and it's only us versus them, etc. So I think that flexibility that you talked about, I mean, sometimes at least allows me to move from that, I'm feeling really tribal right now, or I can kind of have a larger perspective, which doesn't mean that when I see anti-Semitism or complete delegitimization of Israel as a nation, it doesn't hurt. But it allows me to be with those ideas in the sense that I can understand where they come from. I don't agree with them. I wish they weren't there. I wish I could explain to these people why they're wrong. But I can understand how people around the world are not all evil. They're just a product of their own environment and of their own cultures.
And biases and perspective.
Exactly, and conditioning and the kind of their own shame that they're not looking at, etc. And so it does allow me to at least be less wounded. And I think when we are less wounded, we can act from a wiser place. And I think that's perhaps what you mean about our leaders. I wish our leaders could also say, you know, yes, I am the leader of the Jewish state. My role is to protect the Jewish state. And therefore, these are the things that I think. But I can understand the wider picture. It's not black or white. It's not that the left-wing people are trying to tear us all apart. And it's not that the right-wing people are like this. These are all very nuanced questions.
I would even say these bring a perspective that it's important that we have, and these bring a perspective that it's important that we have, and we need all this perspective on the table, and sometimes we need this more and this more. And actually, if we only work with only one of these perspectives, then that won't bring us the peace and harmony we want. And then we need to see that it's not either or. It's both and how do we work with that? And also, you know, the COVID really gave us a lesson that people forgot so fast, and that something can happen somewhere in the world, where place we never heard about, and it changes our life, and you know, it makes people die and leads to huge turbulence. So whether we want it or not, we are connected. You know, from each person to each person in the world, there's about 6 to 8 steps. So you're connected, and whether you want it or not. So whatever is happening there at some point will reach you. It's either be in your generation, or in the generation of your children, or generation of your grandchildren. So you cannot not take into account what's happening outside. And I think that's also part of this mindset of mindfulness, which is to start seeing this connection. And then saying, okay, so now I see the connections within, I see the connections outside, you know, and from moment to moment I ask, what are the connections I need to work on? And what are the things that I'm doing that may be leading to greater tragedies or greater catastrophes in the future? Everything is a result of causes and conditions. So am I creating now the conditions for a better future? Better future also for my grandchildren. That's something that people are almost completely not thinking about. And this is exactly this mindset of seeing the network of causes and conditions. That's part of the clarity.
I want to thank you so much for coming in, for sharing with us. Is there any final thing you think we've missed?
I hope that people get that message that if we want to transform our future, we need to find ways to self-transcend and transform the way we deal with reality and gain more clarity and sense-making. And it's really the project of this time. So
Do you have any ideas for like where people could even start taking their first step?
there's so many apps and
There's so many apps. Yeah,
so many.
yeah.
I mean, it's all over the place.
I'll recommend there's Calm, there's Insight, Timer.
There's, by the way, Richie Davidson's app, which is free because it's a service to the public. It's called the Healthy Minds app, and it also has the science explanation and it's being model, and it really has deep practices from the basic to the deep. And I also want to say that it's not only about mindfulness; it's about this ecology of practices, and I think that there's a lot of other ways to do that. You just need to understand, what you're looking for.
Nava, it was just such a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Toda
Thank
raba.
you.